Eventually. Some days. Start record. All right, there we go. Hi, this is David Perlman, and with me is
Stephanee Stevens, and Heather Cox is in the background reconnecting.
Absolutely. Poor Cox. So anyways, today we're going to be covering with our friends from Infuse. We're going to spend the next half hour talking about a journey and kind of a case study with Northeastern and the kind of journey that Infuse worked with them on. So without further ado, I will turn it over to the Infuse team, and please put yourself on mute and turn off your video so we can concentrate on the Infuse team, and then we'll have some time for Q&A towards the end. It's all yours, gents.
Sure. So hi, everybody. I'm Joel Evans. I'm the Executive Advisor of Unified Communications and Emerging Technologies at Infused Innovations. And Dan, do you want to introduce yourself as well?
Sure. I'm Dan Chemistruck. I am the CISO at Infused Innovations, and I manage our security practices and some of the collaboration practices with Joel as well.
I don't know if Jeff is on. Jeff?
Oh, hey, I'm on. Yeah, thanks for having us here. I'm the founder and CEO of Infused Innovations, and we're a digital transformation advisory and strategic consultancy across a number of various verticals. And the story that Joel will be telling and Dan will be talking about today, it's exciting, given the last 13 months or so of everything that's been happening around us. It's sort of a nice, nice positive story to tell. So I will hand it over to you, Joel.
Thank you, Jeff. All right, so I'm going to take just a few minutes, take you through the Northeastern story, which has become a one of those fireside, campfire stories as of late. Really because the challenge was actually put forth pre-COVID, but it sounds like something that probably would have happened as a result of COVID and sort of the new working environment that we were all forced into. So I'll take you back to a time pre-COVID. It was March 2019, and I had been working with Northeastern's CIO, Cole, on a unified communications strategy. We shared a similar vision that, in this day and age, why is it still so challenging for people to work in person and remotely together and efficiently? What's interesting is pre-COVID, it was primarily folks working in person and forgetting to include the folks that were remote. I'm thinking that as offices start opening up again, as people start coming back to work, we've sort of got a flip on our hands, and we can talk a little bit more about that. But when I came to Northeastern, one of the first things I saw was exactly what I had just described. People were working very efficiently in person, but when it came time to connect to a meeting, and it wasn't something that was just related just for Northeastern. This was a sort of a known problem in a lot of different places. But it's it tends to be a technology challenge, but also a cultural challenge. It's very easy to go into a meeting and get started in person and forget that there are people that are remote that need to be included. And so when you start thinking about that, you say, okay, well, how can technology solve this? How can culture solve this? And that's really what I was focused on when we first got started back in March 2019, was doing an evaluation, an assessment of the technology and the setups that were in use. And one of the first things I noticed was there were incredible, sophisticated technology outfitted conference rooms, classrooms, meeting rooms that were not being used to their full potential. So people would either, go into the room and get frustrated and just not plug in things because it wasn't working right. So I'd see in these giant conference rooms, somebody would be sitting with a laptop and doing a video conference that way. Or they'd be starting a meeting and just giving up that they couldn't get the remote participants in. So what was interesting for us is Northeastern, before I got there, had already been working on a Teams rollout and Teams communication and collaboration. So we, looked at that and said, along with President Aoun's vision of the future vision of how can we communicate and collaborate really with anyone at any time from anywhere and on any device. And since they already had Teams running, as well as a whole bunch of other solutions, there was a pilot going on with Teams calls to really see what that could be all about. And then as part of that, we said, okay, well, if we're going to roll out Teams calls and we're going to encourage folks to do communication and collaboration from anywhere, we started looking at a Surface Hub, the first version that we had hanging in an office, and playing around with that. And we were keeping our eyes on the next version of the Surface Hub, which you can see pictured here if you haven't experienced one. And we said, well, how great would it be if we actually made an investment and rolled these out in a lot of different places for communication and collaboration, and really just get everybody excited about what that could all mean. So we started with a pilot. We started rolling out some of these hubs in different locations and showing people the power of having a meeting anywhere. And also one of the funnier stories was like, you know, when you're in an office environment and you've booked a half hour for a meeting room or an hour for a meeting room, and it starts ticking down to those final couple of minutes, and I'm sure everybody on this call can relate, you start seeing people queuing up outside, ready to take your room over. So we actually got in the habit of either rolling the Surface Hub out of the conference room as the meeting was ending, so we could still wrap up for the next, you know, couple of minutes, or even starting it outside of the conference room, and in a lot of cases, just never even needing the conference room anymore because we had these hubs and ready to go from anywhere. And one more story I'll share just about the fact that you can go across all different devices. When we first started playing around with the idea of doing Teams calls and communication and collaboration, and this dovetails perfectly into you know, sort of what happened next, I found myself joining meetings, starting with voice on my iPhone, suddenly escalating to video, and then someone starts sharing a document and you start collaborating, someone starts sharing a whiteboard and you start whiteboarding. And I could do that from my phone, I could do it from any device. So it really is, you know, sort of the power of the integrated, you know, collaboration and communication that teams can bring. So next slide. This was all, as I mentioned, pre-COVID. So we all know what happens next. So, you know, COVID hits, and what do we have to do? We're now in an environment where people aren't in the world that I had just been telling you about, where predominantly people are in person working remote. Now you've got a situation where people are working remote. But more importantly is not just about working. In this case, we're talking about a university case study. You know, what do? We really didn't know what was going to happen next. Northeastern was way ahead of the curve. I was on a number of meetings with other institutions, so I know that they were definitely leading this space and planning for what was going to happen next. So what do? You know, we got to retool, we have to adapt, we have to innovate. So we had all this great technology, but how do we ensure success so that, you know, students, faculty, staff can now be remote and, you know, hopefully, you know, not miss a beat. So in this case, you can see a couple of examples. We literally rolled Surface Hub 2s into conference rooms or giant rooms that were not ever made to be classrooms, because now we had the new restrictions of very limited seating available. We had this incredible AV equipment that was already in place, but it may not have been, you know, ready to embrace whatever we needed to do inside of that room to handle a classroom or a conference situation. So, you know, it started a little bit before March, but just taking you March 2020 to December 2020 was really take a look at all the things we had, all the lessons learned, and how do we now embrace this new world. So I've got up here, you know, retool, adapt, and innovate. So we had to embrace hybrid fast. We didn't know what was going to happen next. I'm sure everybody on this call could share stories about how every day was different. We had a whole process for Teams calls where we were rolling out different Teams calls phones. We were rolling out different headsets, and all of a sudden people weren't going to be in their offices. So we looked at all the different processes that we had in place, and we said, how can we use, you know, flows and automate and a whole bunch and forms and a whole bunch of other things to really help streamline and automate as much as we could. So we went from personally hand delivering, you know, somebody's device that they requested to now re-engineering how that whole thing was going to work, working with our supplier to send them orders as they were coming in so that they could be drop shipped to wherever people were now, because they weren't necessarily in the Boston area where they once were being handed something. Now maybe they were in, you know, Florida or somewhere else. So, you know, it was pretty crazy time. And it was really more about what do we have and what can we do and how do we make sure that we succeed during all this. I don't have the bullet points here, but imagine that we had antiquated telephone systems that required people to be physically holding a phone, and now we were moving to Teams calls. And we thought we had a lot of time to do this rollout and this migration. And we had some resistance from some of the folks who wanted their traditional phones, and they were used to their traditional phones, that now all of a sudden were home. And they were saying, how can I have access to my home phone? How can I have access to my office phone and be as efficient as I can be in this new remote world? So we really,
sorry, quick question, Dave, right? Sorry, we do interrupt once in a while because we do like to make this interactive.
Absolutely.
So, going with the flow, can you give us a little idea of the scale in terms of Northeastern? How many students, faculty, staff, how many different, communication systems they had, when they started kind of this move to Teams voice and some of the other things that you're discussing?
Yeah, sure. So we were looking at, upwards of 7,000 lines. At one point, we were looking at as many as 10,000 lines as far as different endpoints. I couldn't even put a number on it for you because in this case, we actually had to take over hotel space to be able to efficiently handle making sure that people were able to, attend classes remotely and in person. But just to give you an idea, the accelerated timeline was taking a look at more than 7,000 lines and figuring out how we were going to move those all over to Teams calls. And what's really great is just seeing, and I'm working on another, Teams calls migration now for another university, that Microsoft, you mentioned Andres, Microsoft has been innovating like crazy even in that space. So something that's traditionally incredibly complex and not even close to transparent to the people that are working on doing it, but moving from one carrier to another, or the process of porting, as it's known, moving over to Teams calls, is now something that we're actually not nearly. We're a lot more in the weeds. We're able to see a lot more of the integration going on and the handoffs going on. So yeah, the whole thing here was we weren't just talking about, I appreciate the call out to it, Dave. We weren't just talking about moving the phone lines. We were also talking about moving, I would call it moving the experience, right? Because it had to be a transparent move. It had to be something that the students felt like they were still being invited into to participate in without it having to be a complete remodel and reorientation of what they were used to doing. And same thing with our faculty and staff, especially the staff who was used to coming in to a certain place every day and doing things a certain way. Now all of a sudden we were saying, well, that everything's going to be computerized now because we have to make sure that you're as efficient as possible while you're remote. So it wasn't just about Teams calls, it was really about, and they, as I mentioned, they had done a rollout of Teams before, but now it was really embracing what Teams could be all about, and that sort of the entire ecosystem that comes into play and comes into interaction in different forms inside of Teams.
Super helpful. So that, there are about 23,000 students total, and I think it's in the 5,000 to 7,000 faculty and staff. And the interesting thing at Northeastern, again, I've worked with them for a long time, and I love the way you called it out, Joe. They actually had a big overseas component too, right? So it's a pretty demographically diverse in terms of country of origin, and so there were people stuck all over the place, and then that focus on the the Disneyfication or the Microsoftification, that student experience, right? It really changed not only what's going on, and it's I can't wait till you start bringing this even more forward, because I know there's some really exciting stuff that they're doing now in terms of how they're driving the education forward. So I'll stop talking and go back on mute.
Yeah. Well, and you said it perfectly. The new CIO, who it sounds like you worked with even previously, Please is a true visionary when it comes to this stuff, and really excitedly grabs onto emerging technology and is really an expert in understanding and has put an incredible team in place to do it too, but an understanding people's apprehensions in embracing some of the new technology and making sure that we're not forcing it on them, that it's a gradual process. And that was really a big piece of what we were doing here. We wanted to empower people as much as we could without them having to learn new systems and processes and technologies. Next slide, Dan. So I mentioned before that it was predominantly in person, with people forgetting to get remote folks on. Really what, and it's becoming an overused phrase, but it couldn't be more spot on. It really is the new normal. And as I talk to more universities and more of our clients, they're talking about all the stuff they put in place to be successful when the pandemic hit, and how many times they had to innovate and assess and retool during that time. So what we've been telling people today, and you can see from this picture here, is a perfect example of lessons learned and how you adapt to the new world. You know, there's a lot of, in this case, it's a university setting. There's a lot of universities where you had, you know, the teacher had a camera that was stood up, and not even in universities, but K through 12, teacher standing in the front. There's a camera facing the teacher. The camera's facing the whiteboard. There's a screen showing all the students as tiny little boxes. And that's not, you know, something that's really going to be the normal going forward. If you're going to be able to embrace a hybrid environment going forward, you need to do something similar to what's going on, you know, in this picture. We're hearing this from universities, especially, that they've got, you know, one giant screen in the back, and they're like, what can we do? What are our other options? So what we've been telling our clients is, don't say, oh my God, I have to throw everything away. I got to invest, you know, millions and do this thing over again. We really want to take a step back with you and assess what you've got today. Very similar to what I did in March 2019 pre-COVID with Northeastern. Assess what's in place today. You know, a lot of times people don't realize what they have. There are, as part of an assessment, we usually uncover that just about every flavor you could possibly imagine of communication and collaboration platforms are at play, because depending on how your corporation or university is set up, there may be different cost centers and different budgets, and people can just buy and deploy. Sorry, was there a question? No, just background noise. So that's, you know, a big piece of it first, is assess what you have today, assess what you actually invested in before and during COVID, and let's see how we can, you know, take that to the next level. And then put a real plan in place. It doesn't have to be an exhaustive plan. And again, we're not allocating, you know, millions of dollars, hundreds of thousands of dollars to take this to the next level. It's really just making sure that we're investing the right way. And then my favorite part, probably because I am the emerging tech guy, is build out some proof of concepts. Really try some things out. You don't need to outfit, you know, 70 rooms all of a sudden with all the latest tech. Let's get it right. And then don't be afraid to innovate. It's not going to hurt. That's what we did at Northeastern. We really had to innovate in order to be successful. Who knew that people were going to be scattered across the United States and still needed things, you know, drop shipped overnight, and they don't want to think about that. They want to put in a request. They want to click that the request has been approved, and they want it to suddenly show up on their doorstep without any trouble. They want things to just work. They want to just be able to do a video conference and not have to think about why it was or was not working. And that's really what innovation is all about. And Microsoft has been innovating right along with us, which has only helped us as we've been accelerating everything that we've been doing. So happy to take questions, you know, now or at any other time, but I'd like to turn it over to Dan now to take you through a little bit more of Infused and some security elements.
Why don't we do that, Joe and Dan and team, and then we'll circle back to questions towards the top of the hour.
Oh, perfect.
This is great. Thank you.
Great. So again, I'm Dan.
I'm not hearing Dan.
I was just going to say, I think we're frozen.
Or Dan may be frozen. Dan, we can't hear you.
Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
We can.
Hey, there
Yes.
Hey, how about that? All right. So I'm Dan Chemistruck. I'm the CISO, and I've been working at Microsoft Partners for almost 10 years now. Before that, I was at Starwood running their PCI controls in North America, and before that, I was doing HIPAA controls at United Health. So yeah, I've kind of got a lot of experience kind of doing things the old way. You know, a lot of what we saw last year, we either had projects that we controlled from the beginning with a security first mindset, you know, so we you know, came in and said, all right, you know, you can't migrate anything to the cloud until you have all your security controls in place. You know, your traditional firewall isn't going to work anymore. And then the other side, you know, we came in as like, okay, they migrated to the cloud in a weekend because of COVID, and now we need to put security on top of that. So those were kind of the two big scenarios we saw last year. And then our solution for both our internal service, which we call Infused Threat Protection, you can see on the screen and a few other slides. And we also train larger organizations on this. So if you have like your own internal IT team, most universities. So we build, I'd say about 95% of our security stack is built on Microsoft Defender XDR. So XDR is cross-domain detection and response. It's more than just a rebrand of all the advanced threat protection SKUs from last year. So it's it's taking all of the features from the security suites from Enterprise Mobility Suite. It's adding in what was formerly, I guess they still call it Azure Security Center, but certain things have been rebranded as Azure Defender, and then the nice thing about the Microsoft suite is all of these threat signals get ingested into Sentinel for free. So if you were using like a third-party SIEM solution, to aggregate your security logs, like Splunk, you'd have to pay for that ingestion. Or if you're using like CrowdStrike on the endpoints, you'd have to pay for that ingestion. But if you standardize on the entire Microsoft Security Suite, you oftentimes get a lot of cost savings from using multiple, compared to using multiple vendors, and then you also get the benefit of having everything in one spot. So to kind of show what that looks like, this is common. Like when we come into like an enterprise environment, we see up to 40 different security products, right?
So instead of having all the siloed security products, can you hear me, Stephanee?
Hear you.
Okay, Dan, we can't hear you. So
he's having the same trouble I've been having, clearly.
No problem. It's my fault. So when Dan comes back on, we'll get around to that. So I don't know if anybody else from the Infused team would like to speak to this slide. I can certainly do it. I don't think Dan knows that we can't see what he's doing right now. It's somebody.
I'd be happy to speak to it. This is Jeff, and if oh yeah, no problem. I'll actually turn my camera on too. So I know when Dan talks about this slide, usually he's just trying to focus on sort of the cohesive vision that Microsoft is providing here, as opposed to when you do sort of either specific. Dan, are you back?
Can you hear me? Oops, let me mute my mic. Is this better now?
Yeah.
Better now. And if you think about it, while we got you, turn on your camera, Dan. It makes it even more exciting than our normal presentations. If you have if your camera ready, if you're not a big deal.
No, I don't want to mess with my bandwidth or whatever.
Okay, fair enough. Go ahead.
All right, yeah. So this is, again, just what we come into. A lot of larger organizations, we see up to 40 different products, kind of securing the attack chain. And when you have an attack, you have to go into each one of these different portals, unless you're using something like, QRadar or Splunk to aggregate everything. Even then, each of these products is going to have updates. If, you're not staying up to date with the configurations, you might be missing data if you don't have alarms set up for that. So it's just, in my opinion, is kind of a headache to keep all this in place. You need a dedicated team just to make sure your SIEM solution is up and running, and then also aggregating all the logs. Whereas if you standardize on the Microsoft suite, Microsoft is doing that all on the back end natively. So the next slide, if I can get to it. So again, just standardizing on Microsoft 365 Defender, all these logs, it covers the entire attack chain with a single vendor. I mean, additionally, on top of getting the visibility and having to, less resources to make sure all this is integrated and working, Microsoft is pushing free online learning, so you can get career paths for your IT team as well. So it's just a win-win, in my opinion, across the board. And again, this is why 95% of our security suite that we use in-house for our Infused Threat Protection service is built on Microsoft. And when we work with larger organizations, this is pretty much the roadmap that we outline for them as well. So again, some more reasons why we go with Microsoft. They have the largest commercial data set threat intelligence in the world. I mean, maybe the CIA has more, but we don't have access to that. But, Sentinel is gathering 8.5 trillion signals every day. The amount of attacks that are getting blocked every year. There's no other vendor in the world doing this. Microsoft's security analyst teams is larger than most other security companies' entire organization. So, you got 3,000 security analysts at Microsoft that are just focused on this. Microsoft is spending $1 billion a year on security research and investment. And I think over the last 5 years, since, if anyone used Intune when it was on the old Silverlight portal, since I say that's the defining moment when they went from Silverlight to the Azure portal for management. It's just been great, great since then over the last 5 years. And so not only do I think they're great, Gartner, Forrester is also recognizing Microsoft as a leader in each of these areas. And it's kind of hard to see on this chart, but Microsoft is the top right on most of these. If they're not the top right, they're in the top 3. So again, a solid ecosystem. It's not just about best of breed products anymore. It's a best of breed platform that also happens to have best of breed products in it now. So that's kind of our philosophy around security. This is just a shameless plug for our website. If you guys haven't seen this, we have a lot of literature on the website about the different security SKUs, the most common Microsoft 365 security, SKUs, whether you're doing Business Premium, A1, A3, A5, and then all the different features that come with each of those SKUs. So you can kind of come in here and see, all right, do I get a 50 gigabyte mailbox or 100 gigabyte mailbox, and what the cost is for retail, nonprofit, EDU, and government ones.
Dan, your audio cut out again, so I'll just jump in really quick and say that one of the things that I was mentioning in the chat, and I was pulling off of something you mentioned a little bit earlier, David, was how, when we start talking about things like user experience, right? The stuff that Joel was touching on related to Northeastern, the stuff that probably most of the people on this call really have to care about, right? What's the user experience of the changes I'm about to make or the actions I'm about to take? It's not often that you hear security and user experience used in the same sentence in a positive way. Usually it's, they're diametrically opposed, right? I can either have a good user experience or I can implement good security. And that's one of the things, when I have conversations with other C-level executives or other folks that are high up in organizations, they know that there's an imperative to do security right, but they also know that user experience is kind of a defining thing for a lot of organizations. And that's one of the things I'm most happy about with Microsoft's stance on all of this, especially around conditional access. I think that the fact that conditional access allows for users to be sort of less bothered, quote unquote, with the impact of the security implementation, but still, allowing for really a ton of risk assessment and control in real time. So I want to touch on that to sort of tie the two together, the sort of Joel's piece and Dan's piece. I know Dan's having audio difficulties, so I apologize for that, but I know you wanted to do some Q&A, and we're happy to do that too.
Yes, absolutely. So I think, let's see, there were some, that Defender endpoint server is not included in A5. So, listen, we were charging, so I'm going to, interject here. We were charging for SCCM, right? And we were charging for the, the management agents on each of those servers, right? So that hasn't changed. So, you're still getting a charge. It's a way better product in my estimation. And there's certainly, if you're doing it at scale, we will work with folks to a degree on the price to where it makes sense, but it isn't free. But I hear you, Marge. And then what were some of the best, Jeff, when you as you went into some of your other implementations, what were some of the best practices that you learned?
There's so many. Actually, that's a great. I'll follow on Dan's plug. We have a couple of best practice blog posts on our website for things from whether it's Sentinel or Azure in general or M365, the ecosystem deployment side of things. But yeah, I think the best piece, and Joel, if you're still available, feel free to talk a little bit about sort of how important it is to get user perspective and understand an organization's needs and try to do sort of feature mapping and understand all that piece. But the biggest one from my perspective, as far as a best practice, is don't make a technology answer your top 5 best practices. Make user impacting, end user acceptance, understanding of the needs and challenges of an organization the top best practices. And I think that's sort of the opposite from a lot of, consultancies, right? It's really easy to be like, great, 5 best practices, security, 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 technology, 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 right? But from my perspective, it's really understand the culture, the end user perspective. And if it takes a little longer to do that, that's okay. But Joel, yeah, you want to give your perspective on that?
Yeah, no, I mean, you couldn't have said it any better. I think I love to tell stories. So here's just a quick one. This just happened recently with a client. So we built a PowerPoint for a kickoff meeting, and we used Teams, and we made a nice, a nice team where we could allow external users from our client in, and they could collaborate and communicate. And we posted the PowerPoint, and for whatever reason, they still couldn't access it. So we're tearing our hair out, and I don't have any. Trying to figure out what we've done. Is it a Teams restriction? Where is this restriction? Makes absolutely no sense. Can't figure it out. Long story short, I finally tried to open up in Keynote, just thinking maybe it was like a weird PowerPoint issue. And that's when you finally see all the things like about basically the long story short of it is it was secured using a template that's for internal use only. And Jeff can go into more detail there. But the best part about it, and from a user experience standpoint, is I didn't have to think, I mean, in this case, it was the opposite of what I wanted. But if, let's say I was creating something internally for internal use only, I wouldn't have to go through a million different hoops to make sure that I did it the right way. I would just choose the appropriate, template that's already been handled that way, put my information in, and I'm sure we all get it. I still get one today from somebody in India who keeps including me on some board meeting minutes. And no matter how many times I tell them to stop in my Gmail, I always look to see if there's something worth investing in. But it's a perfect example of, imagine if it had like the true stuff that's now like a massive violation of interstate laws, and it's dropping into my Gmail box.
Yeah, universal. Yeah, universal labeling bit Joel there. So, we, as Dan said, we embrace the stack and we try to protect our own data. And in this case, we had a universal label applied to a PowerPoint. Joel happened to copy it to use with a customer, and the universal label persisted with the document, as it should. And we got you. So there you go.
We got you.
Awesome. Heather or Stephanee, any questions for the Infused team?
No, I'm just really glad to see this in the context of a real world situation, and the case study, I think, really lends itself to others being able to see how this could support their own motions in their own institutions. So really thankful that you guys were able to share today, and thanks, Dave, for always bringing in the good stuff.
Awesome.
Yeah, and
awesome.
Just on one final thing, I love that you lead with what the customer needs as opposed to leading with the technology. That's important in so many contexts, just across the academic space. So thank you for doing that.
Yes, thank you.
45 seconds or less. I think what's the one thing the CIO there did really well in terms of making this successful from their side? Was this an IT decision?
This was a collaborative decision all across the board. I think is probably the best way to put it. It really was a user first experience. And what we always, same thing that we do with all of our customers, we're the technologists, they're not, right? So you tell us what you want to do, and we'll make sure that the technology can do it without getting in your face. And I think that was the key part here. There was so much emphasis on user training and collaboration and communication, because that's really what it was all about. And as part of the training, they actually set up their own Teams room. They actually got invited into a Teams room and a Teams chat and this, that, and the other. And I think that's really the only way you can succeed with technology these days, because it's so powerful. There are so many different things you can do inside the Microsoft ecosystem. That's why I love Teams, especially because it's this fantastic hub that just keeps letting different things hook in over time.
Excellent, excellent. So, I think you set it up perfectly. The CIO was really partners, and I'll just call it with the business, right? And so
absolutely,
business of education, right? And student government, all these other things. That environment prior to that person taking over that role would have a very different, decentralized, multiple colleges within the university. Everyone was on one of everything, right? And that was the hard part. The technology, honestly, was relatively easy. And then the other hardest part of that decision, and I know because I had to sit through hours worth of meetings, there was another partner that did a lot of the hardware on all the other stuff outside of this. I think it was Unify and another organization. And the number of times they talked about what was the right format for phones, because everybody was making it in the decision of what form factor phone I have and do I need a speakerphone. Guess what? Nobody gives a crap about the phones anymore, except a couple of admins. It's all about the devices, right? And everybody's walking around with headsets. So you want to take us home, Heather?
Yeah, just thank you guys so much for your presentation. Thank you all community members for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you next Thursday at MS Office Hours.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.